Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. In more than 28 years of corrections, I have used or supervised Pepperball hundreds of times. Now, as a master instructor for Pepperball, I teach others about the versatility and effectiveness of the Pepperball system. From cell extractions to disturbances on the rec yard, Pepperball is the first option in my correctional toolbox. With ranges up to 150 feet and hoppers that can hold 160 rounds, Pepperball is perfect for controlling large crowds or group disturbances on your yard. Pepperball allows for non-lethal direct impact to control inmates who refuse to comply with lawful orders, and area saturation allows you to achieve buffer zones between groups, or use it for area denial to keep inmates away from security equipment and other accessible areas. To learn more about Pepperball, go to www.pepperball.com or click the link below in this show's information guide. Pepperball is the safer option first. Well, hello and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name's Mike Cantrell, and today I have a guest, Connor Fredericks. He is a CERT commander with the South Carolina Department of Corrections. Connor is a Marine Corps Special Operations veteran with 10 years of combined military and law enforcement experience. In the military, he completed 2 deployments. One as a member of a Marine Special Operations team where he served as a Joint Terrorism Task Force with the 75th Ranger Regiment in Afghanistan. He was also a police officer. He received a Medal of Valor in 2022 for rescuing approximately 100 people from a structure fire at an apartment complex. Additionally, he's trained in criminal interdiction, proactive patrol tactics, advanced interview interrogation, and is experienced in small unit tactics, leadership, and intelligence gathering. So I'm really looking forward to talking to Connor today and learning a little bit about him. First, I want to say thank you for your service.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. I know the country appreciates it. So
yes, sir.
So we haven't met before. This is wonderful. I interviewed your father back in episode 56.
Yes, sir.
Arthur Fredericks. So I think one of the things I always start at the beginning, how'd you grow up? But tell me about how you grew up, because you were there around corrections. My kids, We've talked about this. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but the difference is you kind of followed his footsteps. So I'm interested. Tell me about growing up with a correctional officer.
Yeah. So I've kind of lived all over the country. And my father was working for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So, every time he took a promotion, we found ourselves moving to a new state for the most part.
Sure.
So I've really been north to south, east to west, all over the country. And at one point we even moved all the way from California over to Charleston, South Carolina.
Wow.
And when we were living in Massachusetts at the time, my father was working at an FCI up there, and I was playing a pretty high level of hockey, and my hockey skill set didn't exactly match my academic skill set, and so I kind of had to make a decision on whether or not I wanted to try and go to college, or whether I wanted to join the military, or really what I wanted my life to kind of look like once I turned 18. Really, I didn't even have to wait till 18. I had, parental consent at 17 to join the military. So I joined the Marine Corps at 17 years old. Initially started out as an intelligence specialist by trade. And I spent about 2.5 years with my first unit. I ended up deploying once on a special purpose MAGTF over to Sicily in Africa, where we were supporting various logistical missions going on over there. And then thankfully, I had some really, really strong non-commissioned officers and leadership above me at the time, because I was a junior Marine.
Right.
And they kind of helped shape and really launch the trajectory of my career when I got back, which is when I was assessed and selected for Marine Special Operations Command. And then I went through that whole selection process. It's pretty lengthy, and then was assigned down to the team level, and then I ended up completing a deployment to Afghanistan with that team, like you mentioned previously. And then once I got back from Afghanistan, I kind of juggled my options a little bit. The Marine Corps is pretty. I wouldn't trade my experience for the world. I absolutely love it, and I even thought about going.
Tell me a little bit about what's an intelligence specialist for those of us that don't know. What does that job entail?
It can entail a number of different things.
Okay.
It can, they kind of pitch it to you when you're in the recruiting office is like you're going to go in and be James Bond. I think it's a little bit different than that. A lot of it
Sure.
was, some office work, some paperwork, and then managing a couple of secured facilities and things like that.
So
Um,
interrogations, interviews, kind of
that stuff
detective
came.
work.
It's a little bit of that. I would say,
Okay.
as an intelligence specialist, it was more of like a analytical job, a lot of intelligence analysis. So kind of
Okay.
doing, risk-based assessments and things like that. And, just conducting various intelligence related analyses on specific geographical locations. So
Hmm.
when I was in, supporting that mission in Africa, a lot of it was looking at kind of, the threats in that region and, what could potentially pose a threat to our, forces that were over there.
Okay.
And then it kind of quickly changed once I joined the special operations side of the house. And I was basically trained in multiple different aspects of intelligence. And I can't really get into,
Sure.
exactly
Sure.
what all of that was. Um, but thankfully I had a lot of really, really strong leaders that kind of helped me get to that point.
Yeah.
And they kind of explained to me that, the world is kind of your oyster, as a junior Marine, when you're in the Marine Corps, you can really kind of map out and plan out how your career wants to go. It's really all up to you and, what your motivation level is. And so, I got back stateside after my first deployment and really started working on like my physical fitness. Obviously because the selection process for special operations is pretty, physically intensive as well as, mentally demanding as well. So, I really, really kind of, try to drill down all of those aspects so I could go into selection with a clear head and feel like I could really compete with those
Sure.
around me because you're not only being, assessed by the Marines that are at the command, you're being, assessed by your peers as well. And they do,
Hmm.
you do like peer evals throughout the entire process and everything like that. So, there's a term of being peered out, which is basically, if your peers don't think that you're, capable of being on the teams or being in that type of environment, you can be removed from training just from that, let alone, your actual physical and mental ability. So,
Sure.
um,
Sure.
I got back from Afghanistan after my deployment in 2019, and I ultimately made the decision to get out.
Hmm.
And it was kind of a tough decision for me because I really, really, really enjoyed what I was doing at the time, but I kind of, wanted to find a balance between, finding something that I really enjoy with also being, closer to home. I lost a lot of time at home. While I was I spent 15 months out of my 5 years overseas.
Sure.
So, you combine that with, different training evolutions and, holidays that you miss out on, it kind of catches up to you. And, I think my body was also another factor in that, and I think, when you talk about, the amount of physical preparation that it takes for a special operations deployment, let alone when you're actually over there, I kind of tried to factor in, like, can I really do this for 20 years?
Hmm.
Can I even do this for another 5, Um, and of course, I got out and ended up choosing law enforcement. So, which I didn't realize, at the time was going to be just as physically demanding, if not more. So I became a police officer shortly after I
So,
got out. I think it was right around November
so
of
what was it?
2019.
What was it that drew you to law enforcement? Was it what you'd
Um,
seen growing up, or just
no,
what you
and
knew,
and
or something
and
specific?
honestly, it had nothing to do with my father's career choice. I
Okay.
really didn't know a whole lot about corrections or about the profession of law enforcement. Growing up, I wouldn't say that my dad kind of hid, things from us, but there were
Mm.
certain aspects of the jobs that he wouldn't talk about. And I think that that's knowing what I know now. I think that that's pretty pertinent when you have
Yeah.
children and everything like that. You don't want to expose them to a certain level of, violence or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
So I think he did his best to try and do that. But I think for me, like what drew me to law enforcement was just the aspect of service. I
Okay.
really enjoy service, public service, um, and kind of the good versus evil mindset. You know what I mean? I think that I really found a passion for that when I was in the military,
Yeah.
especially I wasn't I was a little kid when 9/11 happened, so I don't really have the fondest memory of the day and everything like that. But you see it and you learn about it growing up, and
Hmm.
I think it was kind of an easy decision for me to kind of want to be a part of our mission to go get the people that are responsible,
Yeah.
and even for attacks that occurred since 9/11. So, just that good versus evil mindset and just service is really kind of what drew me to the profession.
How'd you find the transition from coming out of that much time in the military to coming into law enforcement? Did it feel comfortable, or was it a real change for you? Or
It was a real change. I think it was amazing to me to see the parallels between military service and law enforcement. And I think there's, a lot that can be drawn from each. And, I
Sure.
think people look at law enforcement as kind of a paramilitary, organization or,
Hmm.
paramilitary style profession. And I think it can be, depending on, what mindset that you, kind of apply to your work. And, we'll go in depth a little bit about that later when we talk about the actual incident. But,
Sure.
you know, I think it was a relatively smooth transition, just with
Okay.
some, kind of tweaks on, how to do the actual job of a police officer to start, and then obviously kind of transitioning into correction shortly thereafter.
Yeah. So when you get to corrections, and I know, tell me about this before we move forward. This Medal of Valor. You got to tell me that story that you
Yeah.
got while
So,
you were a police officer. That's
yeah.
interesting.
So I served 4 years as a police officer. Every single minute, pretty much, of my time as a cop was on night shift,
Mm-hmm.
which I really enjoyed. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really realize that I would enjoy it at the time. So I kind of, when you start out as a rookie, you don't really have a whole lot of say as to what your shift's going to be, whether it's going to be day shift or night shift. I think I would say for the majority of agencies that I worked at, the younger guys that don't really necessarily have families or any of those like crazy obligations yet usually get tailored more towards the night shift crowd. And so, I started it and I was working, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So,
Mm-hmm.
I had to completely switch my, sleep schedule around and everything like that, which wasn't too much of a challenge. I mean, obviously, once you kind of live that military life for a little while and, your sleep just gets flipped upside down.
Sure.
It wasn't the biggest, transition to that, but, I really, really, really enjoyed the work. And I think, one of the things that most people don't realize about law enforcement, especially when we're talking about police officers, is like, you have no idea what goes on at the hours of, like midnight to 6 in the morning in your own community. Most people
Right.
are asleep in their bed, thinking about when they're going to get up for work in the morning, and they don't realize, the people that are out there preying on society at night and, committing
Absolutely.
acts of violence. So, I really got kind of thrown into the wolves in that regard. I lived in a community that's kind of just a sleepy old town in South Carolina. And, most people think it's Mayberry whenever they're, up and walking around during the day, and they have no idea, no idea the things that go on at night. So,
Absolutely.
I worked for 3 separate agencies. I was a canine handler at 2 of them. And the third agency, the last agency that I worked at before I'd started in corrections, was up in Somerville. And I absolutely loved it. I think it had a little bit of everything, within the town. It's kind of a town, but it's also kind of a city based on population. I mean, the population is pretty substantial, and the amount of like through traffic and everything through the town kind of gave you a little bit of everything in terms of crime. And it was like 3 in the morning. I think it was at like the end of September. And
Mm-hmm.
I had only been with the agency maybe like 3 weeks. I already had probably 3 years of tenure at this point as a cop. So, you
Mm-hmm.
know, switching agencies isn't really, anything at that point, but, I'd only been with this specific agency for like maybe a week or two. And, we got a call at like 3 in the morning that there was a structure fire. And sometimes, as a cop, you'll get a structure fire and it's like, okay, maybe someone's grill caught on fire, or, maybe it's just a small fire that's gotten a little bit out of control in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was with my field training officer at that time, because, once you start with a new agency, they kind of put you with a field training officer. So you can kind of get the layout of the town and get the layout of whatever, reporting system and things like that they use.
Sure.
So I was driving and he's in the passenger seat, and I actually drove past the building that was on fire.
Okay.
I didn't see it for
Right.
some reason. I don't know if I got tunnel vision or what it was. But we had turned back around and we pulled into the apartment complex, and an entire building was fully engulfed in flames.
Mm.
So, it's funny because I say there's, such a correlation between military and law enforcement experience, but, one of the things they teach you in the military is kind of taking a combat pause, whenever you're in a stressful situation, and kind of just take a pause real quick, evaluate the
Mm-hmm.
situation as it is, and kind of come up with formulate a plan in your mind as a plan of action, what you're going to do. And that's exactly what I did. I mean, we both got out of the car and we just kind of paused there for a minute. And my field training officer, he's a former Marine as well. So I think that was kind of a unique connection that we both had showing up for that call. But we took a breath. We looked at it for what it was, and it was absolutely wild to see in person. I've never seen a fire that big in my life.
Right.
And then we just kind of went to work. We started pulling people out off of balconies. People were jumping from windows, and we were catching them as they were jumping from windows. And we were breaking windows with our batons, trying to enter. And the amount of smoke was unbelievable. I think
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 of the guys on my shift ended up having to go to the hospital immediately after for smoke inhalation. And we did whatever we could to evacuate. And I think one of the aggravating circumstances at that particular call was that night it was super windy. It had to have been 15, 20 mile an hour, gusts of wind. And so it was just carrying embers and carrying the fire to other buildings. So I think by the time all was said and done, there was 2 or 3 buildings that were almost fully engulfed. And so it's a total loss for people that are living there. So in that
Sure.
moment, you're trying to obviously save their life and rescue them, but you're also trying to provide a little bit of comfort, to people who are literally losing everything right before their eyes, and they can't really do anything about it. So,
Yeah.
we stayed there until the Red Cross got there, and the Red Cross ended up showing up and, handing out blankets and stuff like that. And then we kind of let the fire department do their work and put it out. And it took several hours to put it out, but ultimately, me and a couple of my guys, we were awarded the Medal of Valor for our efforts that night.
Nice.
And it was a super cool experience to kind of go through that with all the guys on your shift. I think when you're out there in a fast-paced environment like that on the street, you don't really get to kind of slow down and appreciate the guys that are to your left and to your right. So I think it was cool to see, and I really can't speak any higher of the guys that I was with on that night, and really a lot of the men and women that I've served with throughout my law enforcement career. I think, I didn't really know what to expect going into a career like that, of the people that I was going to be surrounded with, but I've really met some like lifelong friends and some really, really good friends. And I think when you talk about, the aspects of the job, and when it becomes, like a life or death, situation at a moment's notice, you really, find a good appreciation for those around you that are there in those moments with you.
Sure. Yeah, I've compared it on this podcast. The bonding experience that happens in corrections, in law enforcement, in situations like that, has to be the same kind of bonding experience that happens in combat.
100%.
Because it's your life in their hands and their life in your hands. Did you have
Yep.
any loss of life at all, or in that
the fire?
apartment?
Yeah, we did. We had 2 that ended up that weren't able to make it. I think they were in like the most heavily affected area, and they kind of ended up getting trapped inside and ended up dying of smoke inhalation. And I think that was kind of what hit the shift the hardest. And I had some buddies that were pretty torn up about it, and I think it's just it's one of those things where when you're there to preserve life, and life ends up getting lost anyways, you can count the 100+ people that you saved as a win, but you still in the back of your mind are kind of like, thinking that there's a little bit of a loss there.
Sure.
And, you try your best to get everyone out. And, if you can't, then that's, unfortunately, that's the nature of the job.
Right. Wow. What a great story. I mean, you lived it, but so tell me about, so next you went into corrections, and you went into South Carolina?
Yep, South Carolina Department of Corrections.
Tell me a little bit about South Carolina Department of Corrections. How big is that? How many institutions? I don't know.
I believe it's 21 institutions, and it's about, I want to say 15 or 16,000 inmates population-wise. Okay. And then I think there's about probably 3,000 to 4,000 staff that work across the state. I initially had no idea that I was going to be in corrections. I had honestly, after being a police officer, and I absolutely adored it. I loved the job so much. I never thought that I would, really cross that path. Unfortunately, I had a family member of mine get really sick with cancer. And while I was, working night shift, and, I was, kind of weighing my options with that, because, when you're on night shift, it's very tough to, wake up in the middle of the day and kind of be active and be present. You know what I mean? And I really wanted to be there for my family at that time.
Yep.
It was just a very tough time for my family as a whole. So my dad, had reached out and he said, "Hey, I really think you'd like this job with, the corrections department." And it was a correctional emergency response team commander position.
Yeah.
And he's like, "I think this is right up your alley. I mean, based on, your military service and your background in law enforcement already." He's like, "I think this would be right up your alley." And so It was a lieutenant's position with lieutenant's pay. It was about a $20,000 increase from what I was making on the street, which for me, it was never really about the money anyways. But it was certainly nice to have that much of a bump. And, during a time where my family was kind of struggling. I had just started dating my now wife at the time too. And so it provided a lot more stability in my home and family life, because even she was, we were together when, probably the last like 5-6 months of me being a police officer on night shift. And it was hard for her to kind of adjust to my schedule, because she's waking up in the middle of the day and, I'm getting home at 6 a.m. and going right to bed. So I took it. I took the job. I went and interviewed, and I think I did pretty well in my interview. I was, I don't think there was many other 26-year-old lieutenants at the time when I joined the agency, especially in the position that I was being hired for. But I think the agency kind of took a look at my military background and my background as a police officer too, and they thought it was a good fit as well. So took the job, and I think a lot of what helped was, having a, 33-year plus tenured correctional professional in my household. So I can't lie, I was scared to death to walk into a prison. And
that's kind of my question. What were some of the preconceived notions that you had that either evaporated or you went, wow, that's not the way it is, or
I think like the inherent danger scared me a little bit, which for whatever reason, I don't know why, because frankly, it was no more dangerous than what I was dealing with on the street at the time. But I think it was the confinement aspect of it, and once those sliding doors close behind you, that's it. You're in there. You know what I mean? And so, and that can do a lot for people. Like that can really change their perspective on it. And that can really that can be it. Those doors might close behind you and you're like, nope, can't do it. Can't do the job. And I had no idea, what I was really kind of walking into. And then, I went and toured the facility that I was actually going to be working at. And I think that was actually even before I applied. I went and toured the facility, and my father went with me, just kind of show me around and show me what the environment was like. And once I got in there and realized that, these guys that are, incarcerated in here are no different than the guys that I'm dealing with out on the street right now. I was kind of like, oh, well, I mean, this isn't so bad. I mean, I think the difference is when you're a police officer and you're dealing with a, non-compliant, suspect that you just arrested. Well, you've only got to get them to the county jail. And they're out of your hands. You're going back to the station and typing reports with your buddies, versus dealing with them, for an entire 8-hour shift when you're actually inside of a correctional facility. So,
I've got a friend of mine that's a police officer, and he always tells me he's fascinated with prisons. And he says, man, I don't know how you walk in there. I said, man, I don't know how you walk up on a car and not know whether it's a good guy or a bad guy. I know what I'm dealing with. You don't. So it's just what you're used to.
And it's weird because, of all the people that I've encountered on both sides of the wall, the people that work in the correctional facility don't necessarily want to go out and be police officers, and none of the police officers that I work with wanted to go in and work in a prison. And they would say the same thing to me once I got out of policing. They were like, I don't know how you do it. And I'm like, listen, man, it's really not. It's not that much different than what you're dealing with. But I can honestly tell you that out of probably 90% of the police officers that I work with, I don't think they would set foot in a correctional facility. I just don't. And it's weird to say that now that I've seen both sides of it. But I think some people, I think they're just meant for police work versus corrections. And I think that, you have to have a certain level of culture about you. You got to be able to, interact with certain groups of people that you otherwise might not interact with on a daily basis if you're going to walk in a correctional facility. And so I think having that background as a police officer and having, the military background where I've gone and experienced so many different, cultures and dealt with different groups of people, it really helped me kind of going into that environment and being able to relate with people off the bat, and kind of build rapport, and function in that environment.
Right. So tell me about this job. How many teams, how many members? I mean, what did you do? They brought you in just to be a CERT commander at one institution, or is that over a bunch?
So there's several teams. They only exist at maximum security institutions. And I think that's, just due to the nature of the population that you deal with within those respective institutions. And I think that every single one that has a team needs a team.
Right.
They need that team to exist there in order to help, quell violence and neutralize disturbances that are occurring. But they had the team that I was on that I joined, I think at the time had 4 people. I was going to be the 5th. So each team is outfitted with 5 CERT commanders. It's the same job title for everyone across the board. And there's obviously a team leader. And then, there's specific duties within the team that you fill, whether it be the less lethal munitions operator or, whether you're in charge of equipment or whether you're in charge of tactics and everything like that. So everyone has kind of their own role that they fill. But at the same time, you're kind of like a Swiss Army knife within the institution. You should be able to, fulfill the duties of any regular line staff member, should you be needed. Or if one of your teammates is not at the institution that day, or whether they're off or, they're spending time with family, you should be able to, fulfill their duties as well. And I found that to be a very similar environment to, the one that I operated in when I was with the teams in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
When you're in special operations, it's no different. You're expected to function at a very high level, and you're expected to pick up the slack from someone else if they're not there, if they're not able to perform their duties to, the best of their abilities. So, started on the team that I was working at, and I really, really, really enjoyed what I was doing. And then I was working at one maximum security facility, and then there was another maximum security facility a couple hours away that was kind of struggling at the time. And they were kind of struggling building their team up. They never really had a fully staffed team. I think the max that they may have ever had was 4, which obviously the full staffing is 5. When I got there, I think we only had 3, and I think we only ever got up to 4. And then by the time, the incident happened with me, we were back down to 3 when I left the institution that day. So
interesting. Because why do you think? Because I find that interesting. That you were having trouble filling the team slots. Is that demanding of a job that not everybody wanted it? Was it the danger of that institution? Why do you think?
I think it's a combination of things, really. I think the dangers of the job are a little bit elevated in a position like that. I think when your sole purpose every day is to go in and quell inmate violence, you're going to deter a lot of people right off the bat with something like that, because, there's a lot of officers, they want to go in and avoid that confrontation at all costs. And rightfully so. They're outnumbered, about 99% of the time.
Right.
So when you're that 1% of the 1% that's supposed to go in and confront that violence, head on, so to speak, most of the time, I think it can kind of be a deterrent. But I think it's also one of those unique jobs where a lot of the people, that are within the agency lack the skill set or the necessary experience for that job. So it's kind of hard to get applicants in the door. Like, I know that I don't know if they're still doing it now or whether they were doing it at the time, but I think you had to have at least a certain amount of law enforcement experience or prior military service to even apply for the position. And I think that's just kind of given the job itself. And when you talk about, small team tactics and utilizing less lethal weapons and everything like that, like, you got to be really proficient in what you do. And so it was just kind of a difficult applicant pool for them to kind of figure out. And I don't think the team that I was on is filled yet either, even to this point right now. So they're still struggling, and I think that you just have to target the right applicant pool, and I think you could probably outfit all those teams effectively. I just don't know that that's what they're getting to apply for those positions just yet.
Interesting. So what's a day like? I mean, from my experience at the institutions I've worked, are you doing use of forces? Are you going in? So, okay. Yep. And are you responding to stuff on the yard?
Yep. Responding to stuff on the yard, responding to stuff in the housing units. I think every day is truly different, which is one of the things that I enjoyed about the job. And I think that's just because, in a correctional setting, things can go from right to left really, really quickly.
Yep.
And so, most of the day-to-day duties are kind of, all functions of security. Like I said, like a Swiss Army knife, you're going in and you're checking locks, you're checking cameras, you're checking fences, you're checking the rooftops of buildings to ensure that everything is, secured properly. You're conducting random shakedowns on the yard. You're conducting yard presence, during feeding times and everything like that, where there's large amounts of inmates on the yard and everything like that. And you're kind of, a force multiplier on the yard.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, you're also responding to incidents on the yard or incidents within the housing units. And then, there's also like an intelligence gathering kind of aspect of this too,
Right.
which was good for me given my background, and I'm very well versed in all of that. So, that was one of the portions of the job that I enjoyed the most, kind of, gathering intelligence
Mm-hmm.
on the inmate populace and everything like that. And we worked directly for the warden. So at every institution, we worked directly for the warden.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the direct supervisor. And so your whole job, so to speak, is basically to report back to the warden on the security posture of the institution. And your job every day is to go in and increase that posture
Right.
in whatever way you possibly can.
Interesting. So, I mean, where I've worked before, we had shakedown crews, which sounds like a lot of that intelligence gathering, checking the locks, security stuff. But I've always seen where we just grabbed whoever was available for use of forces. So I'm wondering if is the thought process there that if I have this set group of guys who are trained very well in doing cell extractions, less liability, less injuries, is that kind of the thought process?
I think that is the thought process, but I think that there's a better way to utilize the team, so to speak. And I say that because a lot of what I saw is like a lack of corrections 101, so to speak. By it's by empowering a team to go in and kind of do this Swiss Army knife function of everything, a little bit of everything,
right?
You kind of diminish the ability of your line staff, right? And so then it becomes this inmate's, being argumentative with me. Okay, we'll call CERT. Well, is that really a CERT function, or do you need to de-escalate the situation as best as you possibly can? Maybe call for assistance, and then kind of, go from there, right? Like, it shouldn't be I'm arguing with an inmate and then we're going to jump right to an A-level response down to a unit with an emergency response team, because what you have then is you have a team whose, function is a little bit more than that, going down to a situation that they otherwise might not have to. And then their attention is being directed elsewhere while something else could be going on in the institution. And so it's one of those things that you, as a CERT, commander, and as a CERT operator, you kind of have to, think in the back of your mind, well, if I'm going down to handle this situation, could the inmate population potentially be jumping off another situation across the yard that I'm then not going to be able to respond to as effectively? But I think by empowering your line staff and, kind of allowing them to do those corrections 101 functions, then you can eliminate a lot of the riffraff, so to speak, or less important incidents. Not that any incident is particularly unimportant, but there's definitely a pecking order as to what a CERT team should be responding to versus what they're actually responding to.
No, it's fascinating because and I'll tell a quick story here. So there was a time I was working at an institution and I saw an inmate who was checking out a female officer as she walked away, right? So I snag him up. I walk him over to the corner. I'm like, dude, you're not going to do that here. We don't put up with that. Move on. I don't want to see it again. Well, then afterwards, I went and told her and I said, hey, this happened. I told him this. And then she got upset. And I was, why are you upset? She said, because you took away my power. I should have been involved in that. And so it kind of sounds like, that's kind of the same thing. Why not let that officer deal with it right then and there? Because if you bring in somebody else, then you're taking their power away. Same with the officer who says, inmate, you can't do that because the warden says you can. That's not the way you deal with inmates. You can't do that because that's the way I run my housing unit.
Exactly.
So
and I think that it's no different than kind of when I was working the street and you'd have a supervisor or you'd have another officer show up to your scene and kind of like take over questioning people, take over dealing with other people, and then you're kind of like, one, it can be good and bad because they might have a good rapport with you, and then your supervisor shows up on scene and they don't have a good rapport with him, and then the situation goes left really quick. Whereas if you just allow your people to perform their job duties, then you might get a more desired result. And then by empowering your line staff and your lower level officers, corporals, sergeants, and whatever, you're allowing them to excel within the profession. You're allowing them to develop those skills that they'll eventually need to become a supervisor one day. So
absolutely. That's a great way to look. So while we're talking about leadership type stuff, so tell me some of the leadership that, because you were in a position where you were able to, lead others. So tell me some of your leadership thoughts. What is it that when you're putting together a team, when you're putting together a group, what is it that you're looking for in those guys?
I think when it comes to like team building and developing a team of strong people, you want to one, you want to mold them and you kind of want to develop their abilities, but you also want everyone to lean on everyone else's abilities. So if I'm excelling at one thing, whether I'm excelling at shakedowns really well, I'm able to shake down a group of inmates on the yard, and there's another officer who's a little bit more hesitant to approach the inmates, or maybe they have a little bit of fear in them. They might just be scared.
Sure.
And I've encountered that. I can't even tell you how many times. But so you go over there and you assist, you help them out, or show them how to effectively shake someone down. And by doing that, you're going to build up those people around you so that you're all operating effectively, and then it becomes kind of a well-oiled machine. I think another thing that I particularly would look for in other officers is, carry your weight. You show up to work today, give me an honest 8 hours of work, whatever that honest 8 hours of work looks like. Just show up to work and do your job as effectively as possible. It's not that I would look down on other officers, but if you're calling me to handle something that you can handle yourself, then we got to have a conversation about that. We got to figure out what is the way forward. How can we get you to handle this situation without me being present? Because I'm not always going to be here. You know what I mean? And that was one of the things that I tried to impress upon the other officers, whenever I was at work, because I work a C-card schedule. I was Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. So I'm not going to be there on the weekends, and I'm not going to be there after hours. So how can we get you to operate effectively when you can't call for CERT anymore? Because once that 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock time frame comes around, you're not going to be able to call for CERT anymore, because the team's going to be leaving the institution for the day. And the population knows that. The inmate population knows when we show up to work and when we leave. You know what I mean? And a lot of that, we had, as a team, we have to flex our hours, a lot of the time, because they start to pick up on it. But the overarching lesson there being that you got to be able to operate effectively when I'm not here, because if an inmate sets a fire in his cell in the middle of the night, well, who's going to extract them and who's going to take them to RHU? Because it's not going to be CERT. And I live 2 hours away from the institution, so don't call me at 6 o'clock at night telling me to come take someone to RHU. I'm not going to be there. I won't even be there in time. So really just empowering those that are around you. I think that as a young leader, you have to, and you have to enable those that are around you to do their job effectively. And you also have to be able to, hold people accountable when they're not doing it effectively. I think as a profession and as a society, for that matter, we've kind of gotten away from that holding people accountable and holding people's, feet to the fire. In the game of law enforcement and in the game of corrections, it's life or death. It really is life or death, and I've found that, to be the case pretty personally at this point. So, I think, when you deal with those circumstances on a regular basis, you have to impress that upon those that are around you, because I think once you get into a correctional setting, I think there is a lot of complacency, really law enforcement in general, but I think, in a correctional setting, particularly, there's a lot of complacency. And as the old saying goes, complacency kills.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely it does. So let me ask you a question. I didn't preview this with you, but you're one of the younger guys I've had on the show. How old are you, if you don't
28.
mind? 28. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. I've had a lot of older guys on the show.
Yeah.
And so what I hear these days is that new generation, they're like this new generation. So I want to hear from you, being younger and coming up in this. What is it that you see? What's the challenges being put there by the older generation? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. My generation is the Y generation, and I say the Y generation because we always ask why. Yeah. The old school way of, you're going to do this because I told you to do it, for whatever reason, doesn't fly with my generation. I'm pretty good at it because I served in the military. There really is no option at that point. So, but I think providing guidance and kind of providing what the outlook is, or what the mission is, or what the particular goal in that moment or period of time is important to people that are my age and that are within my generation. The why of why we do things matters. It's not, because that's the way we've always done it. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that too, right? That's the way we've always done it. Well, why do we do it that way? Right. And then you have a more authoritarian style leader in the older generation, and it's not necessarily their fault. I mean, they were taught to lead and taught to be that way themselves.
Right.
So but providing that why and giving the guidance, and not kind of holding all the cards close to your chest. The the majority of people in my generation, they want to be led. They want to be fed the information. They want to be in the know, and they want to have the tools to succeed. So when they feel like they're being you know their ideas are kind of minimalized, then they're going to look elsewhere for employment. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
They got to know that there's a level of buy-in, and that they're able to go in and kind of operate by themselves without being micromanaged, or not given a reason or an explanation as to what they're doing and why they do it. And I think in a correctional setting, it's important as well. Just going back to what we're talking about with it being life and death, right?
Hmm.
Well, I need you to secure these specific doors at this specific time. Well, why? Well, because if you don't, then this might happen, or that might happen. And it seems silly that you would have to explain those things, but I think that it's just important for context. And I think my generation's kind of big on that. We need the context, and we need a little bit of the why as to what we're doing. And it serves a good purpose in terms of your motivation and your camaraderie with those around you. Once
Hmm.
once you're all buying into the same mission, and you know what that specific mission is, you're going to be more inclined to want to go into work every day and complete it.
Yeah. No, that those are great answers.
Mhm.
And I welcome the why. I truly do,
Yeah.
because for many, many decades before I even came along, we did it because we were told to do it. It's because somebody else told them to do it.
Right.
A lot of stuff got put to the side, and we didn't know why. Some of my whys I didn't catch on till 10 years in, when I saw it myself. Somebody get hurt, or somebody escape, or something happened. So
Right.
I think absolutely we need to pay attention to those whys. What are the questions they're asking? And
Yeah.
how can we answer these questions? And are they being answered correctly? And are our policies falling within that? I think
Right.
I think we can learn as much from them as what they'll learn from us coming up in there. So,
Well, and I think like one of the other issues that I've kind of dealt with throughout my career in law enforcement is it's a saying that resonates pretty strongly in my head, and it's, well, military guys or prior service guys don't really last here. And it's, my question to that is, why? Have we asked the question?
sure.
Because as far as I'm concerned, if guys with prior military service aren't surviving with an agency, then we need to ask ourselves what we're doing wrong as an agency.
Yeah.
And it's not to get on my high horse and talk about how every person who's ever served in the military is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I think we all know that that's not the case. I think we all know that the military is kind of a microcosm of society, and there's bad people just like there is on the street. There's people that get arrested in the military. There's people
Yeah.
that get dishonorably discharged, right? But I think the majority of what we're seeing, as far as veterans who are applying to be in corrections and be in law enforcement, are people that want to continue their service and that are genuinely doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And so we got to look at ourselves as a profession and say, why are we not making the mark on that? Because I can tell you, the environment that I look for in a law enforcement agency, or in the profession of law enforcement itself,
Hmm.
is one of camaraderie and teamwork and brotherhood,
Yeah.
and something that kind of emulates the same environment that you get in the military. And if you can't recreate that, then you're probably going to miss the mark when it comes to recruiting people like that. And I also think there's a level of intangibles that veterans bring to the table. One of which is a moral and ethical compass that's a little bit higher than the average person.
Sure.
And I only say that because within the corrections system, I think nationwide, there's a long-standing reputation of corruption amongst certain staff members, and I think you see it time and again. And I think when you deal particularly with prior service members, there's a lot less of that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Why aren't we attracting the military?
Right.
Because we always have before. I mean,
Right.
you look at the guys coming out of World War II, the guys coming out of Korea, Vietnam.
Absolutely.
That was a good government job, and
Yep.
I think you're right. I think they enjoyed the camaraderie, and maybe still being in that paramilitary type organization. So
Absolutely. And like, the fast-paced environment that law enforcement provides, and even corrections or policing, whatever it is,
Sure.
the environment that it provides is something that I think a lot of veterans would enjoy.
Hmm.
I certainly enjoyed it. The guys that served with me that are prior military enjoyed it a lot. And, we can't sit here and say that it's the fear of working in a correctional facility that's deterring our veterans from working here. If
Right.
they're willing to go to combat and die for the country, I think they're willing to, serve in a correctional facility. How do we make that a little bit more palatable for them so we can start, bumping these numbers up?
Sure. Sure. So I've kind of saved it, so that we can talk about it. But recently, you've had a pretty traumatic thing happen that doesn't happen to everybody. We talk about it, and it's something that everybody's aware of, and that was you were pretty badly assaulted recently. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So I was pretty normal day at work, honestly. I think I got to work and everything at the institution was kind of functioning normally to the best that I can describe it. And I received a call to assist another officer down in one of the housing units, and I didn't know the full extent. I knew that she was dealing with an inmate who wasn't being, the most cooperative, so to speak. And it kind of ties back into what we were talking about, with what is a real emergency versus what is not.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a given situation in the institution, if I was physically there and able to help out, I would go help out to the best of my ability. If I thought it was something that I was capable of doing and it wouldn't put me in a messed up situation, I would go help to the best of my ability. And again, that kind of goes back to empowering those that are around you and kind of being there when it counts.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down to the housing unit to assist. The inmate was refusing to be secured behind his door. He wanted to come out for rec. I think he had already been out for rec for about an hour or so at that point, but he was giving her a hard time. So she wanted him to go behind the door for the day.
Right.
So I show up and he's refusing to let her close the door to the cell and secure it. So, I had a little bit of rapport with the guy. Hadn't really dealt with him too much, but
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't to the point where I thought it was going to be an issue. And he told me that I could step in and secure the cell door, which, normally you could take that as a pre-assault indicator if, someone's telling you to do that, especially an inmate.
Sure.
But it's also not uncommon for, an inmate to want to deal with one officer versus the other, especially if, they've been arguing with an officer for the past half an hour before I show up.
Yep.
They might not be too inclined to deal with her anymore. So, and I think that it was, one of those particular situations. And I stepped in to close the door and he tried to physically remove me from the cell, at which time I used my chemical munitions. And then it turned into a physical fight. He and I were physically fighting, and this occurred on the second tier of the unit, so the top tier. And I noticed another inmate out of the corner of my eye attempting to kind of ambush me from the side. I was able to kind of maneuver around that attack and then kind of retreat in a different direction. And ultimately, I ended up with my back basically up against the wall of the top tier.
Mm-hmm.
And now I had these two inmates that were assaulting me. And I noticed a third inmate come from my periphery. And he ended up coming up on my left flank and he stabbed me in the abdomen. And then he stabbed me twice over the top of my head. I didn't realize at the time, but I was told after the fact that I was also being struck with a lock and a sock, that the initial inmate who I was dealing with, he was the one that was striking me with it. So at this point, it was a 3-on-1. I had the other officer with me, and she was doing the best that she could. But ultimately, I was stabbed 3 times and struck in the face a bunch with a lock and a sock. And I told someone else recently. I think at the moment, it was kind of like an out of body experience. I never lost consciousness during it, so
Right.
I have a very vivid recollection of it. And I think, given the circumstances, it's a pretty intimate, up close and personal type encounter. I was able to, fight off or escape the ambush somehow, and I was able to walk out of the housing unit under my own power. And while I was being escorted across the yard by another officer to our medical facility, I ended up collapsing on the yard. And I didn't realize at the time, but I had a punctured lung from the initial stab wound in my abdomen. And I couldn't see a whole lot. There was a lot of cross contamination with the OC spray.
Sure.
So I really couldn't see anything. I could just hear, voices of other officers responding to the situation. And ultimately, they got me to the medical facility and stabilized me there. And then I was trauma transported to the ER about 30 or 40 minutes away from the institution, where ultimately they were able to fully stabilize me. And then, I started the recovery process from there. I think, in the moment, all I could really think about was my wife. I'm newly married.
Yeah.
So about a month prior to this incident, actually a month exactly prior to this incident was when I got married. And then 2 weeks prior to getting married, or 2 or 3 weeks prior to getting married, we found out that we have our first child on the way. So in that
Congrats.
moment, appreciate it. In that moment, that's all I could think about when I was fighting, and I was like, I don't know what I got to do, but I got to get out of here. I said, this isn't where I'm going out. I said, I just said that in my mind, and I was like, this is what I got to do. And so, I was in the back of the ambulance, couldn't even see still from all the OC spray, and I had handed the EMTs my work cell phone. I said, here, call my wife, and put it on speaker, and definitely the hardest phone call of my life for sure.
Yeah.
I told her that, I was on my way to the hospital. I'd been stabbed up real bad. And I think that that's a phone call that nobody ever wants to have to make. And I think it's the nightmare fuel that probably fills the heads of law enforcement families around the country.
Yep.
But she was the second one to the hospital. My dad actually beat her to the hospital. He was the first one there. And then, while I was recovering, I had, numerous people pop in and out. I actually had the director of the entire agency. He popped up at about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night to visit me. And he's great. I can't speak high enough about him. And it really did a lot for my morale to kind of see him there and kind of talk through some things, and just know that he's there and he cares about you. And, you're not just a number in a body.
Sure. So I'm going to go back to the assault. It sounds like you probably walked into something they were preparing for anyway. If they had weapons ready to go, they knew one of them wasn't going to go in, or they were going to have a fight. And
and I think, since then I've done nothing but kind of Monday morning quarterback myself in that moment.
Okay.
And I think that there's a healthy amount of that you can do after a critical incident. And I think, based on everything that I've been through in both my military and law enforcement career, I'm really no stranger to a critical incident. You know what I mean? I think this is something that I've unfortunately been predisposed to throughout my career. And it's unfortunate, but it's also, a blessing in a way, because had I not been, through so much, or had I not experienced so much up to my point in this, this point in my career, I think it goes a different way. Had I not, spent some of my own hard-earned money and taken some outside training and done some of the things that I've done to kind of better myself as a law enforcement professional, I think this goes a different way. And I think that's a entirely different conversation that we could have in terms of training, right? I'm a correctional emergency response team commander, but I've got to go to outside sources and pay money out of my pocket to get the training that's necessary for me to do my job effectively. Why is that, right? We don't ask our NFL superstars to go out and pay for their own football training, right? But me, someone that essentially has to act like a professional athlete in a profession, that demands a lot of me physically, I got to pay out of my own pocket, right? So how do we get better from this as a profession? Because I can tell you that law enforcement as a whole misses the mark when it comes to training, right? We can grab a bunch of grown adults and put them in a gymnasium and have them slap a bag and yell "get back" for 4 hours. But is that going to prepare you for the fight that I went through? It's not. I promise you it's not. It's not even remotely, doesn't even scratch the surface. So I think there's a lesson to be learned there. It's a little bit different of a topic and a little bit of a change of gears, but I do think that when we talk about training, we've got to train for that fight, because that's the reality. And that's the fight that you got to make it out of. Fortunately, I was able to make it out, and not many, people do. You know what I mean? I think even since this incident, I've seen 3 or 4 correctional officers be killed. One down in Florida. I think I saw one recently in Fort Worth, Texas. So that's where the focus and the shift has to be, is how do we properly train our people to be effective in those moments? And then how do we increase the overall safety level to completely eliminate those situations as a whole? And I think what's frustrating for me looking back on it is that at the time, my teammates were being tasked out elsewhere within the institution due to staff shortages. So now you've got emergency response team commanders, fulfilling duties of line staff when they could be together, right?
Sure.
And had I had some teammates there, I don't know that the situation goes that way either. So, there's a lot to unpack with it. But I think overall, I look at it as a win. I'm here. I'll be here for the birth of my daughter. I can't ask for more than that.
Yeah.
So, but it's just frustrating, and it's been frustrating from that standpoint too, just because, we're talking about, someone who wants to be a change agent for the profession. You know what I mean? Like this is like my incident is one of hundreds of incidents that happen around the country on a daily basis.
Yes, sir.
And how many law enforcement officers are assaulted or killed in the line of duty. And I think, kind of what we've been given is like a mandate as to how can we produce the best quality law enforcement officers that we possibly can. I started my career as a police officer, and 2 months later, the incident with George Floyd happened up in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't speak too much on that, but that was also, the American public's looking at us and saying, hey, we need a better quality of law enforcement officer out there on the street. So how do we match that as a profession with the standards in which that we train our professionals to, and meet that bill, and provide, the public exactly what they're asking for?
Sure. And no shade to anyone out there, but the fact that it happened to you, who had been in the military, who had been a police officer, who had taken extra training, you're not the normal correctional officer. There's a bunch of people who do, and I took training outside of work also, but that's not everybody.
Nope.
A lot of people show up to this job thinking it's a factory job, and it is until that
it's
one
not.
day, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
I mean, they don't train military for what is happening right now. They train them for what could happen.
Exactly.
They do, even police departments. I train people all over the country, and police departments have no problems writing checks to put people in my classes.
Yep.
Corrections, it's like pulling teeth. They want to do it internally, which I've talked about that in previous episodes. I'm not a huge fan sometimes. Or they want to do it with and the minimal disruption. Well, we've got to get this to where we can send our people to good quality training, taught by good quality people that gives them tools they can walk inside of. Because, and this is me going off on a little rant, but until our people feel safe inside, you're going to keep losing them.
100%. You're gonna lose them. They're either gonna walk away from the profession, or they're gonna fall victim to the corruption because they feel safer around the inmate population than they do the staff.
Absolutely.
And I think that it's an unfortunate reality that we kind of allow this to happen. And I do say allow it because I feel like that's kind of where we're at as a profession. Like as a emergency response team commander, or as any line staff corrections officer, why is it that I can't be trained in like jujitsu or like a martial art or self-defense, right? You can call it a palm heel strike. You can call it whatever you need to, but I need to be equipped with the tools that'll actually save my life. You know what I mean? And I think that that's important. And I think that the training just has to be taken a little bit more serious. You know what I mean? And I think, we can, as a profession, we can invest all the money we want in, contraband detection or, drone detection or, all of those nice fancy buzzword style things that do help the facilities. And I'm not taking away from it saying that they don't help the facilities, because they absolutely do.
Yep.
But until you start, investing some of this money back into your people, it's going to be tough to meet the mark and kind of increase the overall safety across the country. I think we're talking about an environment that'll never fully be safe. I don't think you can. I don't think you can ever say corrections will fully be safe. Right? The unpredictability of an inmate or an incarcerated individual will always exist. It's existed since the beginning of time. It's how we adapt to that and how we get better, because they're getting better.
They are.
So how do we get better in response to that?
And I don't think the public even knows. When we do rounds and stuff, which we'll stop them if we see them practicing martial arts, if we see them doing this stuff.
Right.
But you'll walk by inmate cells and they've taken their mattress and rolled it up, taken sheets, made strips so that they can roll this up in a ball. It looks like a heavy bag, and then they're sitting there punching the heavy bag on their bunk. They're
Right.
training for the day they have to fight us.
Yeah. And when there's a staff shortage, right? And specifically within SCDC, there's a massive staffing shortage, and especially at the institutions that I worked at. I mean, how can you effectively supervise that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you might be able to stop the one inmate that's doing it, but that doesn't mean there's not another 10 across the other side of the housing unit that are doing it at the same time, right? And so
Yeah.
how do we embolden our people to effectively do this job, right?
Yeah.
And effectively make a difference. Because it's hard. We talk about staffing shortages all the time, and I think staffing shortages are something that's going on nationwide. But how do we combat staffing shortages? We empower our people. We give them the proper training, and we make them feel safe at work. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with that. I think making your people feel safe at work is what's going to make them want to come back to work every morning.
100%. So let me ask you, how are you doing after being assaulted? I know I've been assaulted myself, and you kind of sit down and you have that moment where you go, wow, How about your wife?
She's good. I think, initially she was definitely, rightfully so, just shaken to the core by it, and seeing me in the hospital. I consider myself pretty resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I've actually just outright dealt with it in a much better manner than I have, some of the other incidents that I've been in the past in my career. And I always kind of, carry a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, so to speak. And I try to just be, as upbeat and positive as I possibly can. And that hasn't changed with this incident. And, I think all I've tried to do is just take the positives out of it. While I have some scars, absolutely, but I've got my life. So, that's always a positive. But, I think it goes back to, like, the old saying of everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, you better have one. You know what I mean? That's kind of that was kind of a lesson for me. Yeah. Yep. I mean, I think that was kind of a lesson for me is, and I think going back to the mindset that we carry in this profession, I think it's very important, especially for incidents like that. And, I think had I not had the mindset that I carried into my job every day, I don't know that I would have been as well prepared, I guess, so to speak, for something like that. But, especially as a CERT commander, and I think any, correctional officer should carry the same mindset. But, when you walk into a housing unit, you can't just be walking into a housing unit, right? You're looking for your entry and exit points. You're looking at the population. You're seeing what the population's doing. You're being observant. That's what this job demands of you, because they're doing the same to you. They're observing your every move. They're watching you. They're watching your patterns. You know what I mean? And so being unpredictable, but also being on alert at all times and carrying a combat mindset with you, because you have to have a combat mindset. It'll help you. You got to have like a sixth sense about you. You got to have your spidey senses tingling when you're walking around in housing. You can't just be, you're just walking around like you're taking a walk at the park. You really got to be attentive and on point every time that you do this job.
Right. Amazing story. So thank you so much for coming on to the Prison Officer Podcast.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to seeing where you go in the future. And how many months do you going to have a little one?
5.
5? Wow.
Yeah.
Enjoy that. It makes everything worth it.
Yeah, it's going by a lot faster than I think. I would like to quick say something.
Sure.
I just wanted to thank my dad for everything, and for me being at this point that I'm at now, and kind of helping guide me through this career path. It means the world to me, and I think that he is not only the best correctional professional that I know, but he's one of the best professionals and human beings that I know. And I think that now more than ever, I have a certain level of appreciation for the job that he's now done for 33 years. I haven't even done it for a fraction of the time. But knowing that, he's gone in and done this for 3 decades now is, impressive nonetheless to say, for me, but, I love him. And, I know that he's a little bit broken up over what happened, but, if not for him, I don't think that I'd be, half the man that I am or still be here in this position that I am today. So,
yeah, great words. Your father's a leader that I follow on LinkedIn. I love his posts. And if you guys should, if you haven't, go back and listen to episode 56. He is quite the leader. And that's where I'm sure you've got a lot of this from. So
100%.
Yeah. Great words. You have a great day, Connor. It's good talking to you.
Thanks, you as well.
I would like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors that make the Prison Officer podcast possible. Omni RTLS is a company that I've been working with for the last year. I am proud to be part of this team of correctional professionals who have developed the best real-time locating system on the market today. With Omni's real-time location technology, you automatically know the accurate locations and interactions of all inmates, staff, and assets anywhere in your correctional facility, and you have this information in real time. Omni is cutting-edge software for today's jails and prisons. It is the only way to monitor every square inch of your facility while still being PREA compliant. Go to www.omnirtls for more information and to make your facility safer today. That's www.omnirtls.com. If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Until next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.